So cool, thanks for inviting me. This is really fun. I've enjoyed talking to everyone today. And I'm going to give a really, really broad set of ideas that are going to rely heavily on work done here, especially by some of your former students, Drew and Alex especially. Some of the stuff I understand way less well than they do, and I'm hoping you can help me with that. Also, because it's really broad, there are going to be lots and lots of places where you might have questions, and it's going to be kind of shallow as well. So you can drill down anywhere. You know, anytime you have a question, you can go into depth on any of this. And was there anything else I want to say before I start? No, okay, I'm just going to start. Okay, good. Here's the basic plan. No, here's the basic plan. I'm going to start talking about synesthesia because it was thinking about synesthesia that kind of put me on to some of the ideas that follow here. And I'm going to relate it to empathy and then to work by phenomenologists because that's just what I always do. And then I'm going to switch and talk about interpersonal synergies. And when I talk about interpersonal synergies, I am going to be relying on research done here. And I'm going to talk especially about some complexity matching, which I understand less well than I ought to be talking about. So I hope that if I say something stupid, you let me know. And I hope you can actually let me know at the end if it can do the work that I want to do with it. So keep that in mind that I need your expert help. And lastly, I'm going to make what's going to seem like a pretty strange and big leap to talk about feminist political theory. Why? Because I'm old and I can get away with saying what I want. I wanted to talk about this for a long time. And I feel empowered by my gray hair. Okay, good. So, there's this phenomenon called mirror touch synesthesia, which is a new synesthesia that I learned about from Daria Martin. Daria is an artist, a filmmaker, who, because of our interest in this, is actually one of the world's leading experts on this kind of synesthesia. I'm going to show you a video, which is her video, so it takes license. It's by an artist. But it gives a sense of what the phenomena of mirror touch synesthesia is. And I'll probably turn this down. I'm sorry. Sound should be on. Let's see. Now this should start. There we go.
Left. Left. Left.
It's going to be that loud. So mirror touch synesthesia is a synesthesia in that your senses are being crossed.
Right.
It's a synesthesia in which people feel touches on other people's bodies that they see as happening to themselves. So if you have mirror touch synesthesia and I do this, you'll feel something on your shoulder.
Right.
It's named mirror touch synesthesia because of an unfortunate association with the mirror neuron system that some theorists have made.
Left.
And this is the way it's tested. We just saw a moment ago,
Left.
which is called a sensory interference test. I'm going to stop this. It's too
Right. Left.
No, I'm not going to stop it. I usually am really good at not having technical difficulties. So, sensory interference test is you sit across from someone.
Left.
And a person is behind you and a person is behind the person you're across from, and they're tapping you on the side of the head. And they're also sometimes tapping the person across from you on the side of the head. And your job as a participant is to say which side you are being tapped on or if you are being tapped. If you have mirror touch synesthesia, you are much more likely than typical people to claim that a touch on someone else's body actually occurred on yours. So it's a synesthesia because it's visual information that's experienced as a touch. And I said something incorrect a moment ago, because people who experience mirror touch synesthesia don't experience it as any kind of disability. So saying that they're atypical is probably wrong. Probably all of us are slightly mirror touch synesthetes. That's one thing. Another thing is that mirror touch people who have mirror touch synesthesia are atypical in one way, which is that they cannot view any violent content. Like, they could not play Call of Duty. It's just not possible. They can't watch violent movies. They also report enhanced sexual experiences, and they see a hug and they feel hugged, right? So people who have this kind of synesthesia don't experience it in any negative way typically. It's actually surprisingly common. Something around 7 to 10% of people, according to recent studies, have this synesthesia. I don't know if you noticed in the video, that was too loud, I apologize. There were some times when there were people behind a glass observing. There's some question about whether mirror touch synesthesia is a phenomena that would occur without the presence of therapists who want to diagnose you with it. It might be iatrogenic is the term that's sometimes used. That is, it's partly caused by interaction with a therapist who diagnoses it. Okay. So, do you understand the phenomenon? People experience this as happening on themselves. It has all kinds of consequences in their lives. Like, again, they can't play video games the way the rest of us do. You do, I don't anymore. And they also feel other people's feelings, is the idea. And so when Daria Martin asked me to be involved in this project, she gave me a bunch of interviews that she had done with people who have mirror touch synesthesia. And here, I'm going to show you two different quotations. One of them says, "When I was a child, I had this strange belief that we were all meant to share consciousness with each other, almost a kind of mass telepathy. I remember thinking it was so strange that we each only experience our own minds and not those of others." Here's a different synesthete. "I'm not sure it would be appropriate to say that I confuse my sensations with those of other people, but at times most definitely seems as though I'm feeling through another person. It can be utterly devastating at times, and before it was discovered that I had this particular type of synesthesia, I thought I had just suffered from really intense sporadic empathy." And that's a relationship that's always made in literature on mirror touch synesthesia. You go from this experience to the mirror system and to empathy. That's the way cognitive scientists like to think of this. Yes?
Is it always a direct connection? So like if you tap your shoulder right now, and I have synesthesia, like do I always feel? Is it always a shoulder tap that I feel, or is it just like any sort of it's sort of a generic? Could it like be a generic feeling of being tapped? Or is it always direct?
So there are differences among people. Typically, you would feel it on the shoulder. It's not clear whether you'd feel it mirrored or on the same shoulder. That is, if I'm tapped here, would you feel on your right shoulder because you're facing me? That's people differ in that. Another way that people differ is some people can feel touches on non-living things as well as on living things. Some people can feel on non-humans as well as humans. So there are all kinds of differences. But it is marked by a feeling of a touch of the kind. So, a rapid touch or a rub of the kind that was administered to someone or something else. Okay, so I made this connection as well. And as I've looked into this more and thought more about it, what I've come to think is that actually this person is right. That is, it is weird that we don't experience each other's experiences. And in fact, at least early in our lives, we probably mostly do, and we learn not to eventually as we grow up in our culture. That's the case I'm going to be making as I go forward. But I'm going to start with empathy, really intense, sporadic empathy. Because I started thinking about empathy, and empathy, we all use the word all the time as if it goes back to scripture or something, but it's actually a pretty new English word, right? Titchener made it up to translate Wundt about 100 years ago. And Wundt himself got it from German aesthetic thinkers. It translates literally as feeling into. I'm in feeling. You feel into something. And it was originally used to describe our experiences of works of art. How can you be moved by music? Right? Because that isn't, there's nothing inherently emotional about music. How can you look out at this scene and feel awe? How does things that aren't happening to you, how do things that aren't happening to you cause experiences in you? And this is the idea, you feel into works of art. That's what the word empathy comes from. It was only later that Lips, this guy, used it to feel into other people. So this idea of feeling into, in its original version, actually might, I thought, make sense of the phenomenon of mirror touch synesthesia, right? Because people also feel it, like a tap of basketball, or a speaker, as you saw, and some people might feel it as occurring on their own. But then I talked to my colleague Heidi. You guys know Heidi Maibam? Heidi is a very good philosopher of mind, and she's Danish, and I often say this of her, that she learned to speak English from gangster rap. So her response was, "Fuck that shit, Tony. That's not empathy." Why not? She's an expert in empathy, and I'm not. Well, empathy, the key thing about empathy is you have to know that it's not happening to you, right? You know that it's not happening to you. You know that the other person is not you. You know that something is happening to the other person, and you in some way or another use that knowledge to simulate or theorize about what's happening to the other person and have the appropriate response. That's not what's going on in mirror touch synesthesia. Right? So, infants don't do this either, right? I remember, one of the first times we let my son watch TV, he was your age, don't tell him I told this story because he's embarrassed. When something happened to Piglet, and Piglet started crying, he started crying hysterically. We actually thought, maybe you shouldn't let him watch TV. So like, you don't get the feeling that infants understand that things, he was probably a year old, but you don't understand that young children understand that these things aren't happening to them. So, as a philosopher, it's my right to make something up to explain this. This is a real phenomenon, and I decided I was going to call it sensorimotor empathy. It's a more basic kind of feeling into that doesn't involve any of this stuff. It's what happens to mirror touch synesthetes. It's what happens with infants. Infants have to learn that the world, things happening in the world aren't happening to them. They have to learn that. So I'm just interested in this thing I call sensorimotor empathy, which is what mirror touch synesthetes are experiencing. And what I said about it, this is a paper from 2016, is that it's non-reflective, and it's skillful and implicit way of interacting with others. And why do I say that it's skillful? Well, because you all know someone who can't do it. You know that person that you just can't have a conversation with because they don't react the right way, they stand too close, right? You know, in other cultures where there are differences, you often screw up this way of interacting with others. You don't know how to interact with people who speak a different language because am I talking too loud? Am I standing too close? All of us have a story of that first time they were in some country and the inadvertently rude thing they did. Right? I won't carry there. But so it's skillful. This is a skillful phenomenon. Yeah, you have to work to be able to do it, but you don't have to think about doing it. Right? What I want to suggest is that thing that we all do all the time is what people who suffer from mirror suffering. I'm saying suffer, don't you? It's not suffering. People who experience mirror touch synesthesia do more frequently and more effectively than the rest of us do. They haven't learned to not have the experiences of others the way we have learned to do that. That was my idea in this paper I wrote. And I want to connect this to phenomenology, to Heidegger. Heidegger argues at ridiculous length in his book Being and Time that most of our interaction with the world most of the time is not intellectualized. It's just skillful engagement. We don't think about things that we're doing. we just do them. And we're pretty good at doing them. He called this as interacting with things that are ready to hand. The terminology doesn't matter at all. And he said this is true of other people as well. Right? Mostly, when we interact with other people, it's skillful and we don't have to think about what we're doing. I mentioned this when I was talking to the grad students, so I think that this is the way we use language a lot. A lot of our language use isn't to tell people about something, it's just to deal with people. So Heidegger called this Mitsein, or being with. This being with, you can be with other things and with other people, is a kind of skillful way of feeling into things around you. And remember, feeling into things is stuff that was originally proposed to talk about works of art. And so you kind of engage with things skillfully. That's what how I've been thinking about this. And this is a kind of sensorimotor empathy. And of course, you should be saying, are you really saying that we do the same thing with basketballs that we do with other people? I'm not. I'm saying that there's a blanket that we could throw over both abilities that we have, but they're different from one another. But in both cases, it's a way of skillfully engaging with things implicitly and non-reflectively. We just are with other people. We're just with things that we're good at using. And when that skillful coping breaks down, as it often does, when you stand too close to somebody, or when they stand too close to you, or when they think that thing that you said as a kind of mild joke actually was very offensive, you have to then stop and say, wait a minute, she's upset. What did I do that made her upset? And you have to kind of stop and think about the other person you're engaging with. We don't do that most of the time. We're just with other people. Similarly, late in his career, Merleau-Ponty wrote about this. And I said this to Jeff earlier. Almost all of the important to me things that Merleau-Ponty talked about are concepts that he got from Husserl. And I could only find him discussing this in French from the Résumé de Cours. And it was published in 1970, but it was the course was given in the late 1950s, so late in Merleau-Ponty's life. And I'm very proud that I was, my 8 years of French made me able to translate this. And this is the key point. The self is inherent in the world, and the world is inherent in the self. And the self is inherent in the other, as the other is inherent in the self. What Husserl calls the ineinander. Ineinander is just in one another. Right? It's often translated as interweaving or intertwining, and you will note that that's what this talk is called, the intertwining. Right? So, however it relates to mirror touch synesthesia, that is the thing that I'm wanting to talk about. I do think that this intertwining with others is exaggerated in cases of mirror touch synesthesia. We are in this, the self is in the other is in the self. That is how we are. And it's a skill that we have. Right, so that's the beginning part about synesthesia, empathy, and phenomenology. Now I'm going to talk about interpersonal synergies, and this will be familiar to most of you. And this is where I'm going to say things about complexity matching that I want you to confirm that are okay to say. So, preface to this though, we have some problems in cognitive science. Again, I gave this talk to other audiences, and this isn't a slide I need for you. But the problem is we've already found all the easy stuff in psychology. All the stuff we could find with questionnaires and with scanner boxes, we found most of that stuff. Right? That's one problem. It's 100 plus years in, the low-hanging fruit has been gathered. This is the second problem. We have this idea, because, all right, who has had a talk with a parent and been told that you don't really understand thinking? That's not what thinking is. Right? Yeah. Everybody knows what the mind is. your grandmother should understand, maybe your grandmother is a physicist, but even if not, she should understand your theory in psychology because everybody knows what minds are, right? These are both problems that we have in cognitive science that we need to just get over. Right? We need to get over this. And this is a graphic of it. The first time I showed this graphic, I was with people who cared about the action compatibility effect. So I made sure to put that in the low-hanging fruit because I'm a jerk. The interesting stuff is all up here. And to explain it, we're going to have to use methods that you can't explain to your grandmother. That's the idea. Right. And you know what's up here? Phenomenology might be up here. Right? Experience might be up here. Social coordination dynamics might be up here. The ineinander might be up here. So what I want to talk about now is work that I've done and that you guys have done that I'm going to say is an operationalization of some ideas from phenomenology. And I put this in quotes because, I talked about Heidegger on being with. Being with is way more complicated than the fact that we just interact with each other skillfully. Right? In fact, when Heidegger talks about being with, what he's actually saying is that the very possibility of me having experiences at all depends upon there being others who could have similar experiences. Right? So no experiment is going to get at that. Right? But experiments might be able to get at this, the foundationalness. Sure. The basicness of our interaction with others that's skillful. But that's the kind of thing that experiments can get at. The way I like to think about this is that, these fundamental ontology that Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty are interested in relates to empirical evidence the way that particles in nature relate to particles in a gas chamber. You can learn a fair amount about particles in this room by looking at how they behave when they're isolated from one another. But there's also a lot of ways in which particles that are isolated from one another behave weirdly. And this is Nancy Cartwright. If you know who Nancy Cartwright is, you understand. If you don't, it's too long. No, I can give a 30-second Nancy Cartwright. Here it is. It's called How the Laws of Physics Lie, her book that Dave makes this claim. And what she says is that the laws of physics are all derived from looking at particles in isolation or from other things that are not similar to the way that the things that are being studied behave when they're outside of that situation. So the laws of physics are actually about things that are kind of like, but not exactly the same as the world. So they don't lie, they just don't actually tell the truth. But it's a snappier title. So I don't want you to get the idea that I think that I can study Merleau-Ponty by having people do this, which I don't do. I don't have people do that. And here's the claim I'm going to make, is that evidence about interpersonal synergies and human tool synergies are evidence for the ineinander. The self is in the other is in the self, the world is in the self is in the world. That's. And complexity matching is going to be evidence for sensorimotor empathy. I'm going to draw on these two kinds of phenomena that you people know about as evidence for these things that I'm claiming I drew from phenomenology and from this unusual kind of synesthesia, neurotouch synesthesia. That's the plan. Ready? We have to. My toilet video is not playing. So this is. We'll try one more time because you need to see a flushing toilet. It's important. I've been showing this slide for a long time because I haven't lived in that house for almost 7 years where that toilet is. So if I'm actually showing you someone else's toilet, there we go. So that was a synergy. Recently I showed this video and one of my PhD well, he's not mine, he's Mike Riley's PhD student, said, wow, if I were going to talk about this, I would have spent hours making software that showed a demo of fluid dynamics. Well, you just took a video of your toilet. Tenure. So that's a synergy. So, you know, when philosophers and psychologists and cognitive scientists talk about synergies, people think they're talking about something strange because it's a strange phenomenon according to kind of standard understandings of how the world works. Sometimes it's thought to imply like atypical kinds of causation, and philosophers say there can't be a thing that where the macro thing is causing behavior in the micro thing that makes it up, because that just doesn't make any sense according to my metaphysical views. And then my response is, well, have you ever seen a toilet? So I demonstrate this by showing a flushing toilet to say, even though the idea of a synergy is going to seem a little counterintuitive to many people, they are mundane. Okay, so what's a synergy? It's a functional grouping of elements that are temporarily constrained to act as a single unit. So here, in the tank, not visible, you have water stored, which has potential energy. You push down the handle, that releases the water, which causes a potential energy gradient. That gradient temporarily constrains the water molecules to act as a unit. How does it constrain them? It makes what would be very unusual behavior for a water molecule, statistically speaking, very, very common. That is, all of the water molecules kind of go like this. Right? And they do that without any water molecule saying, hey guys, let's do this. Right? It's an emergent phenomenon. And again, there aren't a lot of philosophers in this room, for which I'm thankful. What you get, though, in one of these, in this situation, is a macro scale constraining and controlling, you could argue, the behavior of the entities that compose that macro scale. That is, you get top-down causation. And the controlling and constraining here is just making something that is statistically very unlikely occur. That's what a synergy is. People who study metaphysics think they're impossible, but they must not use toilets. So, this is what I just said, it's a kind of complex system. And again, it's not magic, it's not metaphysically impossible, because it's everywhere in nature. And in fact, I'm spending time convincing you of something you already know. You are one. Right? So again, this is a picture from Riley et al., which I've been saying for a long time that I got his permission to use, but I actually didn't ask him until a few months ago. Which I was published in this picture several times without asking. Sorry, Mike. So you get a bunch of entities and you apply some constraints and you get them forming a synergy where those entities are connected to one another. And you can find them by measuring. You can find evidence for there being synergies by measuring a time series. You know this. And so what kinds of things are synergies? Whirlpools are synergies, like the one in the toilet. What Mike Anderson calls it talons. I'm going to get it wrong. Transiently active, locally organized networks, something like that. That is the things that occur in your brain when brain areas stick together temporarily for you to engage in a task. That is the main entity that is your brain, the main phenomena that makes up your brain activity. There's also a synergy. Bird flocks are synergies. You mentioned this earlier. Bird flocking is a kind of synergy as well. You are a synergy. Your kidney is a synergy. Your brain is a synergy. Right? Again, this is the kind of complex systems theorist image of the universe. You have autocatalytic chemical reactions, which are synergies that are made. A bunch of them together make up a cell, which is a synergy. A bunch of those make up an organism, which is a synergy. A bunch of those make up an organism, which is a synergy. And then you get Gaia. There are also interpersonal synergies. Now, when you apply constraints to pairs of individuals, you can make them form a unit, and notice that these parts are drawn from both individuals, form a single synergy. And again, you can measure it in a time series. So what I'm calling being with is a kind of synergy. The actors who are, when we're with one another, we are engaging in synergy, and we do so by exhibiting sensorimotor empathy. That's the claim I'm making. And when we dance with people, when we walk with them, when we have a conversation with them, when we play music with them, we are engaging in interpersonal synergies. This is, probably many of you have seen this video before, right? Ashley's been here before, Ashley Walton, who has Ashley been here? She's been here, right? Ashley Walton, our PhD student in Cincinnati. I like to brag that she's now a postdoc at Harvard. It makes me feel important. So Ashley did a series of studies where she got our not very jazz-rich community 12 pairs of professional jazz piano players to come to the lab. Maybe this is all of the professional jazz piano players in Cincinnati. And suited them up in motion capture equipment and just had them play along with different kinds of backing tracks. One was a kind of standard blues progression. Another one was a drone, so it just made a single tone, a single key, single chord. And then she also had an ostinato backing track, which we used only for the first pair of participants because they refused to play along with it because it was in, I think, 7/4. And they were just, nope, we're not doing it. They wouldn't do the second trial. So we stopped doing that. Here are two participants who I think are entertaining to watch. Okay, so again, technical difficulties. This is the first half of that improvisation, and they were really playing differently. Like they were playing something that seemed a lot more like jazz, the kind that you might hear if you turn on the radio, and not something that seems so experimental. Again, one of the most basic things that you couldn't hear it very well, but they were playing along with a drone. Most of the interesting stuff we found when they played along with the drone, because interestingly, and this is what they said in reports, that with the drone, they had to make their own time signature. There wasn't a built-in time signature. And those are all the most interesting dynamics we found were in cases where they made their own time signature, where they kind of played along with the drone. We did all kinds of analyses to this. I'll show you just one. This is of this performance. This is what's called a wavelet analysis. Who's familiar with wavelet analyses? Can you know what wavelets are? Okay. Now, wavelets analyses are extraordinarily rich. These images tell you a lot. I'm going to explain it for those of you who haven't seen a wavelet analysis. Okay, so along this axis, we have the time. We have it broken up into how long a window we're looking at. So this is 1/4 seconds, half seconds, 1 second. This is why this curve is here, because it doesn't make sense to think of how are they behaving over an 8-second window before their 8 seconds of playing. Here we have, this is the time. The heat of the color indicates the degree of coordination. The hotter the color, the stronger the coordination. And these arrows indicate the phase of the coordination. So arrows pointing this way indicate in-phase coordination. Arrows pointing this way would indicate perfectly out-of-phase coordination. Right, so what we have here is a map of this plane. And on this one is the head movements. I forgot to tell you this. One of the things we did is that, I say we, Ashley did, is that she pulled a curtain between them. You can see it here for some of the trials. It made 0 difference in any of our measures. any of the dynamical measures, whether they could see each other or not. There's no difference. Which is, how did that happen? We don't know. So what we see here is for very short windows, for the whole trial, we have pretty much perfectly in phase coordination of head movements. Whether they can see each other or not, if I showed you a different trial with the drone, it would look the same with the curtain hold. Okay, so that's them making a time signature. With their right hand, when they play the melody, with which they play the melody, there is very little coordination. There's this one spot of significant coordination here where they're playing pretty much against each other. Right, over 4 seconds, about 16 to 24 seconds in, they're playing strongly against each other. But that's the only place they're really coordinating in their melody playing. Right? And I want to put this in the kind of context of work that you guys know well. It's been done here a lot. Right? So you think about the stuff that Alex and Drew did with, say, sway and conversation. So this is the sway, and this is the conversation. This is the stickiness to other people. This is the being with, right here. Right? This is the conversation that you can have if you're with someone who is capable with sensorimotor empathy. That's the story I want to try to tell. I haven't mentioned complexity matching yet. And what I want to suggest, where's this picture? Okay. Well, I had a picture that was supposed to appear here. That was actually just a picture from my phone of a tweet by Fred Hasselman, which had a list of all the places that they found complexity matching. And there's Merced stuff listed in there, of course. So complexity matching, when humans engage in sensorimotor empathy, I want to suggest they do so by complexity matching. Complexity matching is when you adjust the period of interaction variability so that it aligns with that of the other person. And why is this important to me? Why is this interpersonal synergies? Why is this the stuff that is kind of the most basic glue that we use to stick to each other? It's a skill that I have to stick to you by matching your complexity. Well, so you guys know this. Complexity is a measure of your fluctuations over time, not quite random fluctuations over time. And we know that loss of complexity is associated with worsening of health and performance. Jesus, what's going on? Okay. So West and his colleagues have argued that in complexity matching, by matching complexity with our partners, interaction partners, we guarantee maximal information transfer. These are mathematical results that I only 50% understand, I have to admit. But I'm going to say them as if they're true, because it's math. It got published. Right, so what I want to say is that we form interpersonal synergies by matching our complexity with the person we're engaging with. It's skillful. We know people who can't do it. We can't do it reflectively or consciously, because you don't know the Hurst exponent of the person you're talking to. You don't know your own Hurst exponent consciously. You're not aware of the level of complexity of your own behavior, much less the level of complexity of someone else's behavior in any reflective way. Nonetheless, you are aware of it in that you can use it to coordinate your behavior with other people. So my claim is that this ability to stick to other people by transferring information in the way that Wes claims is correct, in a maximal way, is sensorimotor empathy. It is what enables us to stick to others. It is the foundation for our interacting with other people. It's the postural sway that has to be there for the conversation to occur. So here's what I've said so far. What I call interpersonal synergies are non-reflective, implicit, skillful engagement with other humans, so they don't feel separate from us. Calling it sensorimotor empathy, which is more basic than the kind of cognitive empathy that Heidi Weibaum is interested in and most psychologists are interested in. And by the way, I'm not married to calling this empathy. It's a real thing, whether we want to call it empathy or not. I like that calling things sensorimotor is kind of sexy nowadays, as is talking about empathy. So I wanted to kind of introduce, improve my my Q rating. Look like know what that means. These are our foundations of our experiences. We couldn't have the conversation if we didn't stick to other people in the right way. This is that we are fundamentally with other people. And again, I'll say it again. Without this way of sticking to other people, we couldn't do any of the stuff that people typically think of as rational and cognitive. This is the glue that makes our intellectual lives possible. That's why I like calling it sensorimotor. We're not aware of doing it, although we're aware when other people can't do it. And I've been suggesting that we can study this in the lab, at least the way we can use, at least the way we study particles in nature by looking at particles in gas chamber analogies, about like that. Yeah.
Sorry, two quick questions. First, you seem committed to this idea that without complexity matching, we aren't able to do things like converse. And towards that, I guess I gotta ask, are there studies in which conversations just stop occurring as a result of, or when complexity matching is not observed, or is this, a phenomenon that's so rare that we're not matching one another's complexity that it's hard to say?
So again, what the studies mostly done here have shown that the degree of complexity matching matches the kind of conversation. So, I supposed to mention this earlier. So, the Alex and Drew and Chris study showed that the complexity matching was worse when people were disagreeing.
But disagreements seem to be very useful in terms
Disagreement is a kind of being with others.
Yeah.
Something we do. Right. So. I'm not committed to complexity matching being necessary for us to have conversation at all. What I'm committed to is this kind of skillful engagement with others as the foundation of our cognitive abilities. What I'm also hopefully committed to, what I'm hoping to be, you'll allow me to say it, continue to be committed to, is complexity matching as a window onto this phenomenon that we can observe. That's the strength of what I want.
And then a quick follow-up question with regards to the study that involved the curtain. It seems like in those cases we don't have as much information to really, attach or match the other person. We're going off the audio signal, right?
There's no audience.
Audio. So
Audio,
the sound of the...
So you will notice, the attentive of you, that I didn't show anything about complexity matching with that study. That's just a really pretty study that shows some interesting stuff, but we didn't do any complexity matching analysis on that data. There's so much data I keep telling Ashley she should just ride these experiments through tenure. There's enough data for her to do that. But so we haven't done those experiments. So I don't know the answer to what extent there was complexity matching of any sort. I suspect that there was complexity matching, and I suspect that the head nodding was a way to transfer information non-visually. Again, according to the West.
But isn't the sound what's transferring
Wait
between...
till the end of the talk.
I'm so sorry, yes, of course.
Now I want to make the big leap which is the stuff I've been saying is stuff that feminist political theorists have been saying since the 1990s, for a long time. So that humans are essentially embodied and essentially social, and that this is more important than the kind of rational understanding we have of one another, is a claim that people have been making for a long time in the feminist literature. And to be clear, I don't think that feminist theorists need my help. I'm not the white man coming into the rescue. I'm not even white. I just learned recently that I'm Puerto Rican. Didn't know this until a few years ago. What am I telling you this? You don't care. Because I just called myself the white man coming into the rescue. I mean, what I think is that we live in a system that's essentially built for things that aren't us. Our political system is built for the assumption that the unit that is us is a rational, selfish individual. And feminist theorists have been arguing that we are more basically social and more basically bodies than we are calculating souls that are accidentally attached to bodies. And I think that we can generate empirical evidence for this as well. So that's the claim. Yeah, so I just said, which is, I think it's funny though, I'm using the tools of the patriarchy to get to the same location as critiques of the patriarchy. That's fun, right? That itself is enough to make this an hour wasted. So, the particular things like the feminist theorists talk about when they talk about the critique of the essential individuality of a human, again, we Americans, we're rugged individuals. That's what these critiques are aimed at. And if the science takes us to the same place, we should follow then the next step, which is that autonomy is not the defining nature of what it is to be a person. They often say that humans are essentially second persons. So that when you think about ethical reasoning, you don't think about it abstractly in terms of the amount of suffering you save. You think about particular other individuals. So the kind of base understanding of an ethical relationship is not, the calculation of the maximum benefit, but instead is a mother-child interaction. That should be the foundation of our ethical reasoning. We're second persons, we are with others. And this is often called care ethics. And finally, these theorists have argued that empathy is more essential to moral reasoning than rationality. So, again, here's the idea. Feminist theorists start, let's critique the patriarchy. It's bad for us, it's bad for everybody. No one is the kind of thing that our system is based on people being. We are essentially embodied. We are essentially social. We can get to the same spot with the science. But for the political theorists, that was a premise, not a conclusion. So we have to follow them to their conclusion. And these are the conclusions that they reached, I think. If we get to their starting point, we ought to follow them too. And this is what I'm exploring now. I'm not an ethics or political theory expert. Varela wrote a book about ethics, Francisco Varela, kind of a hero of mine. He talked about it as being an expedition into unknown territory to him. And that's why I think of myself here as not expert in any of these things, but as forging ahead, following the argument that I think we can make about what persons are. I think that is it. Yes, that's it. Thank you.
So as usual, the first 15 minutes will be for questions from students, so from now until 5 past 4.
First 15 minutes?
Yep. Would
Wait,
you
is it
like?
more than that?
It's an hour after that.
Exclusively students in the first 15 minutes. Would you like to moderate or would you like to?
I can do that.
So just a clarification point, I was a little confused as to your point for the consciously controlling complexity machine. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Well, we're not consciously aware of the complexity of our own behavior. And we're not consciously aware of the complexity. let me take the word conscious away. We're not able to describe, at least, the complexity of behavior, or the complexity of other people's behavior. So we're not reflecting on that. I'm not deciding to wiggle a little more because of the way you're wiggling when we're having a conversation. I'm not deciding to adjust my sway pattern so that it matches your sway pattern, right? So I couldn't decide to do that because I can't experience my own sway pattern consciously, reflectively, and you can't experience, or I can experience yours either. That was the idea.
Okay.
I mean, I will say that we can experience it because we have to do it because we are controlling it in some sense of controlling. And there are lots of debates in the philosophy of mind about the relationship between experiencing and control. And I'm suggesting that, and awareness as well, that we have to be aware of anything we can control our behavior with respect to, even if we can't discuss it or reflectively talk about it. I mean, I have to be aware in some sense of aware of the complexity of someone else's movements, even though I couldn't tell you what it is.
I guess it gets a little confusing in terms of turn taking, or when you're, especially when a lot of these speech measures and complexity matching kind of are really taking into account the fact that I'm being responsive or waiting for you to, for example, finish talking, or try to match a certain sort of speaking rate that you're doing as opposed to just kind of going like really fast or just really unpredictably slow. So, I mean, there are some measures that you can sort of change sort of the affect of, sort of, I guess, your own complexity. And I was just wondering, so that was, I was a little confused as to
Right.
sort of these expectations of, well, if I know that you have a certain way of talking, I will try to match that if we're having a sort of friendly, sort of respectful conversation.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess you can, what we can do is you can say, oh, I'm dealing with Tony now. I've got to talk slower or talk faster. Or, but what we can't do is, I think we can't do this. Could tell me I'm wrong. We can't say, oh, I need to adjust it so that the Hurst exponent of my postural sway is such and such.
I see. But I guess there is sort of a local codependency, right, that eventually emerges at the much longer time scale. So I can't just, because it's hard for me to realize how the complexity over a long period of time is going to come out unless we get enough back and forth, and then it's sort of convergence, I guess.
I don't think I need to disagree with you on that. That seems true. Yeah. I don't know the order, so we'll go.
I was wanting some clarification sort of on what Adolfo was just asking. So you're saying we don't control our complexity matching consciously. I mean, it reminds me of this, I forget who actually did this experiment, but it's pretty famous, where they determined that people don't try and catch a fly ball by figuring out where it's going. They just keep adjusting to it as they see it falling, right? They keep trying to keep it in the same place in their vision. And it seems to me like maybe that's sort of similar to what you're talking about in terms of complexity matching, that we don't know our exact complexity or theirs. We just kind of keep adjusting ours as theirs is adjusting, right? Is that sort of right, or?
So, in the same way that we aren't able to describe the strategy we use to catch fly balls, and by this is the outfielder problem is something that we discuss all the time, without actually looking at what outfielders do. I mean, the World Series was on last night. I'm not going to watch any of it, but if you saw an outfielder catch a fly ball, you will note that they almost never did what the scientific theory says you do when you catch a fly ball, because all the time, even like I only played baseball in high school, but even at that moderate skill level, you always run so that you can be in a position to be running toward the infield as you catch the ball. So you don't adjust it so that you're going to be where you don't do that optical adjustment. I mean, so it's a way you can catch a fly ball. So that there's that. I just like to remind people that this is an unusual study. Only if the ball is at the very edge of your ability to intercept it do you run that way. Now that I've pontificated for a while, I forgot your question. Your question was that is that similar, this conscious inaccessibility of the strategy that you're using, similar to the conscious
Yeah, well, and just the sort of like, you know, like you don't have a value for where the ball is going or anything like that. You just kind of like little micro adjustments back and forth until you settle into a stable state.
Yeah, well, I think that was what we end up doing when we're interacting with someone in a conversation or in any kind of interaction that lasts for more than a few minutes, right? For a few seconds. We are constantly like making small adjustments, conscious or unconscious, reflective or unreflective, to keep that interaction going.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So you, when you were talking about the touch or the mirror touch, synesthetes, you mentioned two accounts. It kind of seemed like one could be true and the other couldn't. And one was you go to mirroring, to empathy, and the other one was we do just at some points experience what other people are experiencing. Is that right?
Yeah. So the person claims to have thought when they were a child that it's weird to not have other people's experiences.
So I'm wondering if those have to be different, or if it's a degree thing or something. So coming from the neuroscience perspective of the mirroring phenomenon, it'd be like when we observe someone else in pain, the parts of our brain that process pain are also active. So at some level, we're experiencing it, but it doesn't reach all the way down to us recording the physiological experience of pain. And the same thing kind of happens when you watch someone else doing a task. Your motor area of your brain is active, but you don't move it. And so I'm wondering if you think that what's happening in these synesthetes is something between that activity that's going on, that's sort of simulating it or whatever, and the physiological pain, and there's a lack of inhibition to shut that off.
So you might as well have just reported what is in the literature. When neuroscientists talk about this, it's called mirror touch because it's put in terms of the mirror system, and that is exactly the explanation people typically give of it in the neurosciences.
But that's not, is that in line?
It's, well, I mean, I'm not saying anything about brains, but so. Back to the first part of the question, those two quotes are different in spirit, certainly, but I think they're probably not precise enough to determine whether they actually oppose each other. So it could be that you think you only recently learned as, let's say, I'll make the number, a 3-year-old, that, wait, I don't have everyone's experiences all the time. But after that you have intense sporadic empathy. So it could be the same. But these, as I was, again, Daria Martin, who's not a scientist or a clinician, did an amazing series of interviews with these people who have synesthesia. And those were thematic. There are people, typically they describe themselves as, I just kind of thought me and other people shared minds. And people say, I just am more empathic than most of you. And I wonder, frankly, whether these are groups, because she didn't get no identifying information, obviously, whether these are people who have different therapists, who are talked about it differently. So I'm not sure. So I was going to go back this way.
Just to clarify, earlier you talked about this sensorimotor empathy as being something we use skillfully to navigate the world, but you'd also said that it's something that we kind of have to unlearn as we go, because babies and infants seem to have this inability to disconnect themselves from the world, and the anecdote of your son crying when Wavelet cried kind of thing. So kind of A, what's the skillful part, and B, are they both kind of skillful in a way? Isn't shutting off the ability to empathize with others itself as skillful?
That's good. So I agree that they're both skillful, absolutely. The suggestion that I'm trying to make is that by growing up in a culture that values individuality as much as ours does, and the individual as much as ours does, we are inclined to learn to see ourselves as separate from others. And it's a skill, it's something we learn to do. But it's not, it's Western. Right? That, in other cultures around the world, there's a lot more we-ness than I-ness. Hazel Marcus is the person who's written at great length and very persuasively about this. So it's a skill. Both are skills. Being with other people is a skill. Pulling yourself away from other people is a skill as well. What I want to suggest, I guess, is that we place more value than is appropriate on the second skill. That is, on not feeling terrible when we read the news about people getting killed. No, because that's not me that got killed. No, we place more emphasis, I think, than is appropriate on things like that. That makes sense.
Do we place more emphasis on that, like as a good skill to have, or is it just like a coping mechanism that we like because we're so inundated with?
So by mentioning these feminist political theorists, I am suggesting that I don't think it's a good skill to have.
Right.
But when you're surrounded by other people who do it, it probably is necessary. I mean, so I'm writing a book about this, and I have a chapter titled, So We Got It Wrong, Now What? I'm not pretending that we're going to we're going to change the world so that we agree with Tony, because it would be huge. I mean, what I'm suggesting is that the foundations of our culture make us into something that is very unnatural, and we should be aware of that and intentional. This is the word that education gives you. Intentional about our willingness to continue it. If we want to continue it, we should. If we think it's led to badness, as I tend to think, we should try to rethink it.
And then, can I follow up
Yeah,
with that
of course.
question? Once we intentionally learn to have a sensorimotor empathy with other people, or to get away from that really individualist skill, can it become automatic again, do you think? So to become more like your son who's crying when Piglet's crying?
I don't know. I mean, I've been trying to foster optimism in myself, but my initial reaction is no, we're fucked. I mean, and it would be bad for us as individuals to not be this way. If you're thinking about what's going to help you get through this culture that we live in, trying to unlearn this is not the thing, right? So I mean, I think this is kind of way in which we become that is kind of required by our environment, as you suggested. Maybe it's a way to use a coping strategy, but it's purposeful, right? We don't think of it as, you have to think of yourself as an isolated individual who's autonomous from everyone else in order to cope with a terrible situation that you're in. That's not how we think of it. We think of it, this is what we are. We are, by God's design, by nature, we are these individuals, right? And that's the when we come to kind of full fruition and maturity, that's what we will be. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, you too, man. You too. Wait, here, can I institute a policy? In not my own department? So this is a British thing, which is there's the hand versus the finger. Do you know this? The finger is a follow-up question on the same topic. We have hands and fingers. Can we do that?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a finger and a finger. Finger.
This is just it's a question. The question that you're asking is one that I've been thinking about often as well. And there's So I've been thinking about there's these new experiments using virtual reality experiments to put you in the shoes of another individual, and some of these have found that like if you put yourself in the position of a homeless person, you'll give more money to subsidize housing for the homeless. Do you think that like that could be a way that can turn this around? Like if you actually experience what someone else is doing, you're more likely to turn that back on for that person, that group of person.
So, I mean, this is not a study. This is a practice.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but
So it does work. It really works. It's not
Yeah.
just. It's not just science.
But science
It's- yeah.
has been picking it up a lot this year.
Yeah, that's right. We can improve ourselves certainly by doing that purposefully. You know, here's the way I like to think of it, though. I mean, wouldn't we all be better off if when I walked by and saw someone cold and wet, if I felt the cold and wet and because of that wanted to help? I mean, that's the way I think about this. So this kind of like, what I'm suggesting is learning to not do that is something that we should try to not foster in ourselves. There's another finger, then a finger.
So, just as a quick follow-up, I'm a big fan of your connection to the feminist critique of ethics, because I do think that it highlights a lot of very important points, mostly the interconnectedness of individuals. But I'm kind of curious if you're of the mind that, so it's clear that society isn't structured for organism, or isn't structured around the conceptualization of people as social or interconnected, at least in the Western Hemisphere. And towards that, because we're so prone to aligning ourselves with other systems and learning about those systems, does it in turn, so do we grow into it, I guess is the question. Do we grow into it, and if that is the case, can you possibly show that we're bad at doing this at the end of the day? So even if somebody does grow up to be fantastically callous, they may still have responses that are emotional and interconnected, despite their outward professionalism.
I mean, I can't show that. I mean, but what I can suggest is that we can look to places like, Asia and Africa to see different sorts of cultures. I want to recommend everybody a work by, a popular work by Abby Berhana. It's in Aeon magazine. The online magazine is called "I'm a Person Because of Other People," which is just a kind of an aphorism where she's from, which is Africa. She's getting her PhD in Europe now. So that's just, I'm a person because of other people, and that's just a thing that you say to your children when you're in Western Africa, where she's from. And so there are possible alternatives. Finger.
Yeah. So I just wanted to push back a little bit because it doesn't seem like sensorimotor empathy. Like, I guess the claim is because sensorimotor empathy has been found to exist, that says that we empathize naturally, and so therefore should foster empathy and not cut children off from separating themselves from the emotions of their parents and others, because that's unnatural. Is that kind of the
right?
And then I have a follow. I'm just curious. I want to make sure I get it right first.
Okay, so here's the claim is that this way of being with other people is developmentally early and required it's so built into us that we can't really be aware of ourselves doing it, in fact. So that's the claim. And the further claims are me saying, well, hey, look, there are these people who think about ethics and politics who start here and let's see where they get. Right, so I want to suggest that we follow them where they get from the starting point, that is kind of my 3/4 to the end point.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, what do you take though about like evidence that I can't like say any papers, but I think it's pretty well established that people who don't differentiate themselves actually do suffer. You know, like you're saying, like it does cause suffering if you can't separate it. Every time you read the news, or even like, I know some people like, I feel like some environmentalists are super empathetic with trees even, you know, and like stuff in the natural world. And I get that, and I feel like I have that somewhat, but I feel like it does cause suffering, and it can be unhealthy if you're empathizing with all these things that are happening in the world. And I don't know that that is something we want to foster. And also I think that, yeah, different cultures develop differently in response to different pressures on them. And we do have I mean, it seems, I just don't see in the evidence that you presented enough to say like, okay, the feminist critique can be right, but it could be as right as, you know, people who are more for a more autonomous politics. Do you know what I'm saying?
So, right,
there's a lot in there.
yeah, there's a lot in there. So I guess what I claim that I would make, and this is not me making it, this is just me spouting what these feminist theorists argue for, is that if we all suffered when we read the news, we would fucking do something about it. Right? I mean, we would be much more inclined to not allow children in Yemen to starve if we felt the pain of hunger when we saw those pictures in the New York Times. But that's what I want to suggest. And is that necessarily a recipe for a better world? I don't know. I mean, I think it might be worth trying something different. Is that?
Yeah, I guess it's just we can't do anything if we aren't empowered, and I feel like having too much empathy like personally, I feel disempowered. Every time I read something like that, it's just like a reminder of how little power I have to change these things that do affect me, you know, like in an emotional way. I do feel like I saw that picture of the starving girl in Yemen, right, just recently. Like, I definitely felt something emotionally, but it doesn't increase my ability. You know, ought implies can, right? But in this case, like, I don't know if it does, like, I ought to do something, but can I? I don't know what I can do, you know?
Well, the can here is massive, right? It requires lots of us to do lots of things. And again, you know, the question is whether it's worth it for all of us to do all of those things. I think that our feelings about that are dependent on our feelings that, wow, we would have to change so much for things like this not to happen, are dependent on, are encouraged by our ability to turn off that punch in the stomach you feel when you see that photograph. 1, 2, 3.
Which order?
Okay. No, I was just going to say to you that I feel the polar opposite, where I think the more empathy that we have gives us less excuses to not go pursue those things. So, I mean, like, if you had unlimited empathy, like, maybe you would stop thinking in your own best interest and only think of the best interest of the others. So if that meant going to Yemen, I don't know, maybe you drop out of your PhD and put all your funding towards getting that airplane ticket and off you go. I don't know. I just think that if you have the ability to not turn off, you're a lot more focused on your goals, at least.
Yeah.
So I guess the fingers means we have to bring the adults in. So
this isn't even a question, it's a quick comment. If everybody had that feeling when they look at a picture of a starving child, then they donated $10 to the Red Cross or some food agency that day, $10,000. That would be huge if everybody did it. Holy moly. You don't have to quit your career goals. And $10, if we all did it all at the same time, would be absolutely massive.
So, I'll actually jump right off that. there's a lot I think I agree with a lot of your talk, but it highlights something that for me, and I don't mean to single you out, Victor here, that bothers me about the way cognitive science is done all over the place, which is a tendency to disconnect it from the social sciences and natural history. So I get that feminist theory is your entry point into thinking about humans as being connected with other humans. There's nothing wrong with that, but this is also like, I mean, sociologists have been saying this for 100 years, and there's also now 35 plus years of theory and cultural evolution, which not only tries to bring in the idea that humans are the way they are because they are essentially social and cultural, but also tries to understand how cultures form and are stable or not stable. So while it sounds great that wouldn't it be awesome if everyone was super empathetic and pro-social, we also know that that's not evolutionarily stable from a game theoretic point of view. If everyone is super pro-social, all it takes is someone to be not pro-social and completely exploit that system. So therefore we build institutions and norms that deal with these things, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, right? And I think you have to put it into that kind of framework before you make any kind of prescription for what you should or shouldn't do.
Right, so I acknowledge that sociologists and evolutionary theorists have been thinking about this for a long time as well. And I'm not, well, I'll say where I agree with you first. It is, I think, positive that we all are coming to the kind of essential sociality, the kind of the human and other species as well. Now, so I can be happy about that. I guess the thing that I want to suggest though is that I'm mistrustful of some of the game theory modeling, and especially I'm mistrustful of the virulence.
If it's math, it's true.
So yeah, but then if it's math that shows that say group selection can be a real phenomenon, then it's not true.
I mean that's just I completely disagree with that statement, but because it's wrong, but also because every math model is much more about specific assumptions of the system. So if you say group selection can't be true, then that's just not a true statement. If you say group selection can't be true because it requires these conditions that aren't met in the world, that can be a true statement, right?
Right. So the I've been thinking a lot about this kind of 2010 fight over group selection.
I'm well aware of it.
Yeah. And it seemed like the arguments against Wilson et al. Were primarily that this, even though you've demonstrated the conditions of possibility for this couldn't happen.
Well, this is a much more niche conversation probably because I care about this, but I don't know how much everyone else does. But I mean, he's talking about Novak, Ternita, and E.O. Wilson published a paper on group selection or inclusive fitness really in 2010. And I mean, that was really actually about, they were arguing in favor of group selection.
Right, no, I was suggesting, I was speaking in someone else's voice. I think that group selection is rare, probably, but certainly happens.
So I think there's a good argument to be made that group selection in genetic evolution is probably rare. But in cultural evolution, we're much more groupish, right? And so therefore, the mechanisms that don't make groups cohesive in biology, in natural systems, other non-human systems, those conditions don't hold. That is one of the strong arguments that's been made, and I tend to agree with.
Right. I've just been reading about this. I read a bunch of work about reproductive decision making, right, which tends to suggest that there's a pretty strong, in some places, anti-individualist tendency in cultural evolution. Right? So this is autobiographical. This is why I've been thinking about this a lot for the last few months. And why I brought up the E.O. Wilson paper from 2010, and the virulence of the violence of the response to it. So, yes, let me get rid of the autobiography and say, yes, of course, the conditions in nature for group or altruism might be rare, probably historically have been rare. And we need the intervention of culture and practices in order to make us not free ride and not take advantage, not fail to cooperate. But that is, I think, independent of the normative considerations that would suggest that not free riding and altruism, being altruistic, are positive. So I'm not. So here
Well, you can't really dissociate them though, because.
We're on your 7th follow-up. I think other people might have questions.
Fine. All right. We can talk about that.
Basically, I have moral objections to some parts of evolutionary anthropology. That's,
Okay.
Yeah, that's which we can talk about later. Oh, I'm doing this. I forgot.
Yeah, you're doing it.
There's a finger.
Yeah, so I wanted to build sort of actually on almost that entire topic thread with what Matt was saying as originally. It seems like we're saying that that if we were more aware of the fact that we are intrinsically pro-social and that we fostered this strong empathy traits that would be better for our society, better for us, better for all those things. And I'm actually wondering if maybe that the scale of society might have something to do with the fact that we might lose some of those empathy traits. So for example, you imagine that as society's scale goes up, you interact with more people on a daily basis, you're going to interact with some more people who are going to be casualties of the fact that you have this big machine of society, right? And so maybe it is actually sort of what Matt was saying, that it is maybe harmful to you to be empathetic with every single distraught person you see, because sometimes, for example, even if you have a big society, some people are going to be in conflict with one another at some point. Those kinds of things are going to happen. And so then how would you be able to resolve that if you're in this large scale, very interactive society?
Right. So we're not built for large scale societies.
Right.
I mean,
We live in one.
We live in one, but we're not. I mean, I was just talking shit about evolutionary anthropology, for which I apologize. But all of the assumptions there are that we were built for small groups, and a lot of our failings come from the fact that we don't live in small groups. So I don't think that anything about our endowments are going to help us deal with the fact that you're allowed by the rules to have 5,000 Facebook friends. Like interacting with 5,000 people over a short period of time is not something that humans are biologically enabled to do. We have to have other means of dealing with that. And while one way to deal with it can be to turn off your caring for other people or dial it way down, I'm not sure that that's the best way.
Fair enough.
Are there fingers? Hands, good, hands again.
You went to feminism, so I'm going to see that and go to ableism.
Okay.
So this is my autobiographical detail that leads me to hopefully a more broadly relevant question. So I used to work as a personal caregiver for a very intelligent woman who actually was a doctoral student at the University of Washington, who happened to be a quadriplegic, who had the motor control abilities of about a 3-month-old. And I think one direct implication of a strong reading of this premise is that she lacks foundational capacities to think and reason and to feel empathy with others. That wasn't anecdotally my experience, and I don't think that's a position you really would want to take, but I think that the general premise that things like representing oneself in relation to others or in training with others is foundational to social cognition as it normally occurs is something that many people would be really comfortable with. But a strong version of this says, that's how it happens, that's how the brain works, or the mind works. And I would just offer the possibility that there is a great deal of flexibility in the human nervous system, and that there's probably multiple pathways to achieving competencies in social cognition and other areas which don't require this kind of sensory-motor resonance that you described. So what do you think of that?
So I would suspect that the person you know and other people like her come to have the sort of social skills they have probably through a very different path from the rest of us, and the intellectual abilities that they have through a very different path from the rest of us. And you know, the thing about it is that coming to that place through a very different path is all the more impressive and all the more difficult. So I don't want to suggest that there's any necessity, you know, being one of us can come about in lots of different ways, and you know, you could do it with difficulty that I have a hard time imagining, probably, being unable to adjust your posture, or but if you have things like eye movements, this is a long-standing argument against the idea that, you know, we are essentially embodied as been quadriplegic, but quadriplegics are active. They're not, you know, the people who make this argument have probably never been around. It's not that you're, you know, it's not that they're just footballs, right? They don't just sit there. So I mean, I wouldn't, I'm not going to make any kind of strong essentialist claim about where our abilities have to come from. But I do want to say that an ability to engage with others by some kind of probably movement is going to be necessary. Like I don't imagine you could come to, I mean, movement, like eye movement is movement, mouth movement is movement, and it's responsive. I mean, I don't think you could become like us if you were a box that only spoke, I guess is what I want to suggest. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, my general take, I think that that's one avenue to just recognizing that any proposal you want to name has a sort of healthy degree of overclaiming associated with it to sort of give it some momentum.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's an empirical question to what extent things like embodiment or various forms of simulation theory and other things in the whole kind of an activism world and all of it actually come together in actual mind. So I guess I would just, without not appreciating the importance of them, just put it more as I think there should be more emphasis on coming up with testable empirical hypotheses that would adjudicate and help us know, you know, in what circumstances do we need these abilities? Is there a class of cognitions or interactions between people where they're not as important?
Right. I mean, I was about to make an intro, but I say that I'm not very dogmatic about many things. I'm less dogmatic than most philosophers, though. But one of the things I am dogmatic about is that everything is an empirical question. And so I think I 100%. Thanks.
Yeah, my question was actually a bit related to that. We spoke briefly earlier about different types of explanations, and a couple of things that you mentioned in the talk made me think that you were describing complexity matching as a causal or mechanistic explanation for empathy, but I'm not an expert on complexity matching. I was wondering if there is any evidence that shows that, or is it basically purely correlational at this point, and causality could be the reverse, or maybe it's just a formal description of what it looks like when people empathize with each other? And if so, that would kind of say to us that you could, you know, if you couldn't move your body in certain ways, as Colin's friend, that you could still potentially empathize.
She was my boss.
Not friend, apparently. What did she do to you?
She paid me money for services.
But then maybe you could empathize and not show those other signals that could possibly be an emergent process or something.
Yeah, I have not thought about that at all, about the kind of evidential relationship between the phenomena that I'm talking about. All I've said is that finding complexity matching could be indicative of this essential stickiness. That's the phrase I use all the time for some reason. It could be indicative of it. Now, is it the mechanism for it? I doubt it. I mean, I guess I want to say it's a signal of it, right? And that's really mild. I mean, it's not to claim that it necessarily goes along with it or anything like that. So because we see this, that should give us reason to think that humans are unreflectively, skillfully sticky with one another. But I don't, I mean, you're the experts on complexity matching, certainly compared to me. I don't think we have very much knowledge of anything like the mechanism by which we match complexity. Do we have much?
Self-organization. Thanks, mechanism. Well understood.
So yeah, I don't know.
Okay, yeah, in that case.
That's a dissertation question, not for you necessarily, unless you want to do that. Unless you want to spend your time on something really, really impossible.
All right, let's think.